Merci à vous tous de votre présence et de vos prières à cette messe pour les soldats canadiens tombés au champ d'honneur et pour la paix. 11 years removed from our last military conflict in Afghanistan, generations removed from the great wars of the last century that swept Europe and reached to the very ends of the earth, and continents away from the present bloodshed in Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, it is very easy for us to sanitize war in our minds and in our imaginations. It is all too easy to forget the human cost that so many paid in service to us, to remain untouched in our hearts by the sacrifice and the horror experienced by them. Il est beaucoup trop facile de considérer la guerre comme quelque chose de lointain, quelque chose sur les écrans de notre télévision ou de notre ordinateur, quelque chose que nous pouvons désactiver. Nous pouvons facilement oublier qu'il s'agit d'une terrible réalité. C'est quelque chose que nous, soldats tombés au combat, ne pouvions pas désactiver ou ignorer. For myself, I thought a great deal about that during this spring, during a mission to the Ukraine. I thought about it as myself and one of my two vicars general ministered to military chaplains who had endured years of war and suffering, emotional anguish, and been immersed in all-pervasive atmosphere of death. And when I was asked to preach the funeral of a young man cut down in Donetsk in the prime of his life, seeing the inconsolable grief of his mother and the shocked disbelief of his father, the heart-rending weeping of his friends and family, and knowing all the while that this almost unbearably painful experience was one of only 1,300 funerals in that one parish alone in the past 3 years. I thought about it as Father Terry and I walked the city, seeing men with shattered bodies, shattered faces, amputated limbs, or walking through newly created cemeteries overflowing with tens of thousands of new graves, praying all afternoon with the heartbroken parents, the spouses, and the little children of the fallen. And when the air raid sirens pierced the nights, knowing that drones or missiles had hit the city, and now other new graves would soon be dug and soon be mournfully filled. We do well to remind ourselves about the awful, brutal reality of war so that we are never tempted to romanticize it or treat it lightly or just accept it as inevitable. Millions of promising young men and women torn apart and buried in the dirt before their lives even got started. Each one loved and cherished someone's dear child or spouse or parent, leaving a gaping hole that lasts a lifetime. Nations and entire generations demolished. At Hiroshima, Pope John Paul II reminded us that the sufferings caused by war are not confined to physical destruction. They penetrate the soul and poison relationships between peoples for generations. And at Sarajevo, he said, every war is a war against the innocent because they are the victims. The cry of the child, the widow, the refugee, these are the true voices that must shape our conscience. we do well to remember why it is that those who survived the wars of the last century were so determined never to forget. Determined that we and all succeeding generations never forget. Why they were so adamant that we never disregard or disrespect or treat lightly the cost that so many Canadians paid to bring about the relative peace that we have long enjoyed. Why they were so committed to making sure it never happens again, so that their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would be spared the awful consequences of war that they endured in body, in mind, and in soul. They did what they had to do. They answered the call of king and country. They answered the voice of conscience in their hearts. They stepped up. They stood up and fought for what is true and right and good and beautiful in this broken world. And they left us the responsibility to remember. We owe them that. And the remembrance that we owe them is more than sentimental words or a minute's silence once a year, as good as those things are. It's more than that. It's a pledge, a commitment. It is honoring them by the way we live our lives. Only a few days ago, our Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, reminded us of what it means to truly honor the fallen. It means, he said, to make ever greater efforts for peace. In saying this, he is not giving us a vague and unrealistic ideal. He's giving us marching orders. Peace is much more than the absence of war or conflict, which you and I can do very little about. It's much deeper than that, and something that we can do something about. Peace ultimately involves and means a conversion of hearts and minds and lives. It means living as authentic disciples of Jesus, who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Allowing the seeds of the gospel to take root in each of our lives, allowing the revolution of his teaching to pierce our hearts and change us from within. And that means to recognize and respect the inviolable dignity, equality, and human rights of every single person, friend or foe. To see in each one a person created, chosen, and loved by God. To refuse the temptation to hatred, or racism, or unjust violence. To forgive from the heart, even as we pursue justice or fight in a just and necessary war. To love even our enemies, to seek and desire their salvation even as we must resist their aggression. To demand that our governments aspire to the ideals that our veterans fought and died for. And for the soldier, the sailor, and the aviator, it means, as G.K. Chesterton said so well, it means fighting, not because you hate what is in front of you, but because you love what is behind you. Fighting in such a way so that you do not lose your humanity, but save it and preserve it for everyone. As Pope St. John Paul II said, war arises from the human heart, from pride and hatred that turn away from God. Only a conversion of heart can ensure lasting peace. Aujourd'hui, nous célébrons la messe pour ceux qui sont morts au service de notre pays. Nous nous souvenons de nos soldats tombés au combat. Nous prions pour eux et nous les remettons une fois de plus entre les mains de notre Dieu aimant et miséricordieux. C'est bien et juste. Nous devons aussi partir d'ici et garder la foi avec eux. Nous devons combattre le bon combat de la foi en vivant de la plénitude de l'évangile de la paix et invitant les autres à la mort de Dieu révélée dans le Christ Jésus. Enfin, nous devons prier pour la paix. À Fatima et dans les apparitions approuvées dans le monde entier, Notre-Dame nous a demandé, il nous a même supplié de prier le chapelet, le rosaire pour la paix. Ensemble, en ce temps dangereux et incertain, répondons à son invitation et devenons de guerriers de la paix. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them, and bless and empower us to be peacemakers, your true sons and daughters, true soldiers of Christ, the Prince of Peace. Amen.